Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in this webinar focusing on fleet management in Asia. My name is Schoefs, Chief Editor of Global Fleet, and I all welcome you to this new Global Fleet webinar. The reason why we organized this webinar that we want to deliver structure, information and expertise about the region in Asia, and we have seen that the information for international fleet managers is sometimes missing. In 2016, in the first semester, we conducted a global fleet survey with 100 global and international fleet managers. And in that survey, we have seen that although the APAC region is already today an important one for global fleet managers, as you can, for example, see in the fleet sizes on your screen, you see that for APAC, the average fleet size of the respondents of the global fleet survey were above 3,000 vehicles. We see also that Asia is the market where they are missing the most information. And the global fleet managers have indicated that they want to understand more about those markets. You can see it in this slide where you have blue circles indicating the same average fleet sizes as you saw before. So the average fleet size for Europe is 6,672. For North America, 3,401. And you see for Asia Pacific, 3,199 vehicles. The yellow circles are, let's say, indicating the lack of market understanding. So based on what the global fleet managers and the global fleet survey have answered, we have understood that there is still some knowledge to be given. So the topic of today should really interest all international fleet managers and global decision makers. Now, when we talk about China, then often we talk, when we talk about Asia, then often we talk about China. And with a reason. Of course, China is the largest and most populated country with over 1.3 billion inhabitants. And China is also the #1 market for new car sales on a global level, with over 42 million vehicles sold every year. But fleet is still immature if we compare that, for example, to North America and Europe, and leasing, professional funding of vehicles, outsourcing is only in the starting blocks. This is for most of the Asian countries, and so another thing that we should underline is that Asia is, of course, much more than China. It is the biggest continent with a puzzle of specific countries, and all those countries have different challenges and also have unique positions in terms of car fleet market, taxation, regulation, and also future outlook in terms of fleet management. That means a little bit like, for example, in Europe, where you also have a big jigsaw puzzle of countries, that the one-size-fits-all approach probably is not the solution. But we will come back on that a little bit later. Nevertheless, we see that for APAC, we can also take some lessons in terms of the similarities that there are on the market. And I want to delve into some of the hurdles, the obstacles that global fleet managers might have in Asia and in the APAC regions. The first one is that within the countries in Asia, there are often many states and provinces with their own legislation and a legislation landscape that can vary from one day to the other. So it's not always easy to determine a long-term, let's say, fleet market strategy, as due to legislation, things can change quite quickly. In line with that, a lot of business is state-driven. So you can imagine, for example, that in China, there is quite a lot of involvement in everything when it comes to business from the administration and the government, and that will also have an effect, let's say, on the processes of your fleet management over there. Asia is the continent where we see quite a huge rise of megacities. Now those mega cities, they have their own challenges. They have mobility issues. There are quite a lot of people that are commuting every day. They have huge issues in terms of environmental aspects. And linked to that, some of those cities, they have installed reduction on the number plates, so a certain number of number plates that they can allow people to use every year. And so also that might be a hurdle for the development of your fleet management in those cities. It's something that should be underlined. And with the fact that there are some big mega cities in Asia, there are also traffic and driver behavior problems. So you can't compare, let's say, the driver behavior due to the development of those cities with countries and cities that you know from more mature fleet markets like in Europe and North America. As fleet management is not so mature in Asia, there are still some local preferences, and also you have to deal with local players. For example, in India and South Korea, there is a tradition to work with domestic OEMs, and the fact that not all international and well-known fleet partners and fleet suppliers are already present in every country in Asia could also be, let's say, a stimulation to go looking for some of the local players. This is, for example, the case in Thailand and in Indonesia. One thing that is really important is that although as an international fleet manager you might have optimized already your strategies in more mature continents where you already have implemented also some rules and principles around health, safety and environment, it will not always be easy to try to implement those principles also in new developing markets. When you deal with markets in Asia, you always have to balance, let's say, what you want to do from an international perspective versus the practicality, the things that are really possible in those markets. And then, last but not least, some of the best practices that we already have in the more mature continents are not always known in the Asian markets, or the environment, let's say the business environment, the legislative environment is not yet adapted that those methods, for example full service or finance leasing, can easily be integrated in those countries. I think now, for example, Indonesia, India and South Korea. But luckily there are also some opportunities. Asia is accelerating its learning curve, and slowly but surely fleet management and outsourcing will become accepted as methods to generate more efficiency. So as we all know, the APAC region and Asia as a continent is fast becoming a really important and growing economic region. In quite a lot of countries in Asia, GDP forecasts are above 5 to 10%. And it's also a continent, one in which we as fleet community and fleet operators need to be constantly updated upon, especially as changes that will affect our car fleet strategies and so car policies are occurring every day. And that's exactly the reason why Global Fleet, and we are really happy, has published the first ever guide to fleet management in Asia for international and global fleet managers. This guide contains the fleet management outlook for 6 selected countries. It's a guide of 60 pages, and what we did is, in a structured way, we unravel really the fleet management best practices in those 6 countries. So you have chapters on the economic outlook. We deal with the automotive and fleet market, with insight in brands and car models that are used. We have a chapter on financing and car leasing preferences, with also a view on the fleet and lease partners that you can work with. We have insight in the company car taxation, really an important aspect also in Asia. We deal with fleet management trends, so we look a little bit further into the future with what can happen tomorrow and after tomorrow. And finally, we have expert interviews. We have local and international experts, suppliers and fleet managers that have shared their knowledge and their vision. This to bring you a neutral and forward-looking picture of the fleet management situation in the 6 selected countries. Those countries are China, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and South Korea. And I'm really happy that one of those experts that also contributed to the first ever Guide to Fleet Management Asia 2016 is with us here today. We can welcome today Tony Elliott. During his long career, Tony has built up great insights in the APAC region, and today he is willing to share some of his views on some of the most pressing questions that global fleet managers have. So we selected 5, 6 questions from global fleet managers that came from our global fleet survey, and we are going to ask them to Tony. Tony, are you among us?
Yes, hello, good afternoon.
Hello, Tony. I hope that you are doing great. Today we are talking about Asia. It's really an exciting and a challenging continent also in terms of fleet management. And so let's go to the first question that we want to ask you. Tony, why, in your opinion, is it the right time to deal with Asia in terms of international fleet management?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. For many customers operating fleets within Asia, there is a realization that the region is becoming economically vitally important. It is also realized that there is little or no real control of the car policies, and thus the running expenses are disproportionately high. As the importance of the region increases, so does the need to ensure that the vehicle fleets are managed efficiently.
Okay. A second question that we have is related to some of the differences. So we selected 6 markets, and we want to know a little bit more because we can imagine that, okay, those are not the same markets, so there has to be also some differences in terms of fleet management approach. Can you list some radical differences that you see in the approach to managing fleet in those countries?
Yes, there are some radical differences, but I'll give you, as you say, a few examples. In some countries like Thailand, for example, operating lease is a recognized alternative and efficient acquisition method, as opposed to Korea, where it is financially beneficial to rent vehicles from daily rental companies than it is for them to go into an operating lease. So that is quite a considerable difference. Each country within the APAC region has its own particular focus point, and these drive the taxation and other government policies. China, for example, is becoming very aware of pollution, as well as the current infrastructure being unable to cope with the ever-increasing demands for vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Current policies restrict the registration of vehicles significantly, and it might be advisable for a fleet user to consider other mobility options in China, for example, Uber, Didi, taxi services, or car rentals. And then we move to another massive continent or country, in India, where the fleet market growth has few, if any, restrictions. There are some attempts at dissuading 2000 cc plus powered vehicles, plus diesel engines, but this is not only crude, but just encourages the purchase of a smaller engine vehicle. So the net effect of that restriction, or those restrictions, are no reduction in the actual fleet numbers. So there you can see 2 very, very tangible differences, radical differences, between 2 countries with vast fleet opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And so in the guide that we published about fleet management in Asia, you can also discover more of those differences and discover also the DNA, let's say, in terms of fleet of the 6 markets that we handle in that guide. Tony, another question. I talked a little bit about some of the obstacles and hurdles that global fleet managers might have in Asia. Can you talk a little bit about the biggest opportunities that you see for multinational fleets?
Yes, of course. The awareness of fleet management is growing rapidly in that region, and there are numerous opportunities to encourage the suppliers and the vehicle users to get it right. And they can get it right from learning from the hard-won experience that we have gained in North America and Europe. It's been a long, hard 42 years in Europe and North America, and we made some mistakes and we learned from those mistakes. And it would be good if we took those learnings and experience and applied that to Asia as well. It'll make it far more rapid and far more successful in a far shorter time.
Mm-hmm. One of the elements that we see in the Asian market is, okay, we have great international fleet suppliers and fleet partners, but not every OEM, not every fleet management company, not every mobility provider is already established in all of the markets in Asia. So is there also an opportunity sometimes to try to work with local heroes, or is there perhaps a need sometimes to work with some local partners?
Yes, from a consistency and influence point of view, it's always beneficial to collate fleet management under as few international suppliers as possible. Mm-hmm. However, there are superb local heroes. I've met some really, really good fleet management, fleet services companies in Asia. We call them local heroes, or in every country within Asia. In some countries like South Korea, as I mentioned before, car rental companies offer a service to fleet customers that is far more in line with the country's tax regime and local needs. So yes, there are some superb local heroes within countries in Asia.
Now, what advice would you give with regard to the car policy compliance within Asia? Because it's a puzzle of different countries. So what, let's say, is your advice for fleet managers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the point that's come across to me over and over again is that no one size fits all. As we just talked about regarding Thailand and South Korea, you can't come up with a car policy that covers both of those countries in a bland statement. You have to take into account the variances within those countries. There are too many variables by country. The total cost of ownership methodology is still immature, and I really mean that. Even when people nod and say, yes, we do total cost of ownership, they're not really doing the total cost of ownership. Quite often they miss fuel out, for example, which is, as we all know, a big factor in the TCO. Taxation is very variable. There are different influences for that taxation wherever you go. CO2 measurement is unknown in some countries, but the foundation for taxation in others. Car policy vehicle types are to a large extent ignored by most countries. We see head offices in Europe and North America coming up with a car policy, and it looks very good on paper, and it certainly is a lot of paper, but in fact it's not followed, and they will only focus on those parts that they think will be looked at regularly by the head office. In some countries, operating lease is expensive and impractical, whereas daily rental is cheaper and benefit in kind efficient. One of the major solutions for the HQ car policy owner is to cut your cloth according, your coat according to your cloth. One coat is not going to suit all. Mm-hmm. It is pointless in writing a car policy that is impractical, at best expensive, at worst impossible for the country in question to follow. Make sure that your car policy can be followed by the countries to whom you are aiming that car policy. Time and time again, I've seen a token adherence to global car policies by these APAC fleet managers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tony, final question. What can international managers do to ensure that the global policies are aligned throughout?
Well, firstly, I guess recognize that not only is Asia different, but each country in Asia is different. If savings in CO2 or emissions are a corporate objective, then review each country and employ a car policy that fits the needs of the drivers or the subsidiary and the government guidelines. I've seen CO2 policies coming through from head offices that just will not be adhered to by the country concerned. In some countries, they don't measure CO2 or emissions. That will change, but at the moment, all they can do is lie. I understand that the current maturity of each country, the headquarters can encourage maturity, but only when large corporate fleets have an influence in that country. And quite often, the average fleet size, the average corporate fleet size in a country is very, very small. So the influence is not really significant. So to believe that you can influence it is probably a mistake, and you should be aware of that. Large international operating these companies are struggling to grow against the local competition in countries such as China because they stick rigidly to the maxim, if it's good enough for Europe, it must be good enough for China. Well, that just isn't the case. China is a specific market with specific taxes and issues where the Chinese are coming up with solutions for those problems. And we need to recognize that and go along with the flow rather than trying to change the way that they think. Fleet owners with the vehicles in Asia could do well to follow the above comment. It's pointless having a car policy which cannot be adhered to in each and every country.
Mm-hmm.
Control your costs.
That's really important, I think. Try with fleet management optimization to control your costs. Tony, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your insights and also for the support in publishing, let's say, the first ever Fleet Management Guide to Asia 2016. If you have more questions about fleet management in Asia, then there is only one solution. And we have that solution. That is our new guide. So on 6 countries, China, India, South Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. And this guide will help you better understand the fleet marketplace in these countries with the goal of supporting you in taking the right decisions as an international fleet manager. You can now order this comprehensive 60 pages outlook about Asia on our eShop. And to thank all of you for your participation to this webinar, we offer you now a 15% discount to buy this guide. And all the information to benefit of the 15% discount will be sent to you by an email directly after this webinar. In the name of Global Fleet, I would like to thank you for your participation. Of course, you can find updates on the fleet markets and on fleet management in Asia and all the other continents on our Global Fleet platform, and we hope to meet with you soon in the next webinar. Thanks and goodbye.